scholar. During her master's thesis in applied anthropology at OSU, she worked with Mayan migrant women on how they experience pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum in Oregon. She's doing her doctoral research in cultural anthropology at the University of Oregon with Dr. Lynn Steven. She is interested in learning how Guatemalan Maya migrants in diaspora build their intersectional identities and reconstruct community in Oregon. Please welcome Liesl.
Well, hello everyone. It's nice to be here with the CLLAS community, to see familiar faces here. Before starting, I would like to thank CLLAS for funding this exploratory research that I'm going to present today. I'm very grateful for it. The fieldwork I did last summer helped me to figure out my dissertation topic, and now I have a good idea of what my thesis research will be about, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it today. And hopefully I'll present it next academic year. So I could talk for an hour and with more detail about my findings on the Guatemalan Mayan community in Oregon, but I have 20 minutes, so let's see how this goes. So, but before starting, just a little bit of context for people who are not familiar with Guatemalans here in the U.S. According to the 2020 census, there were about 1.6 million Guatemalans living in the U.S. But the Foreign Ministry of Guatemala calculated that there were about 2.9 million Guatemalans in the U.S. in 2020. But some scholars go even further, and for example, my teacher scholar Liesl goes even further and estimates at least 3.2 million Guatemalans living in the U.S. So there's no good data on indigenous groups like the Mayans because most of the time they are mislabeled as Hispanic. And although Guatemalans, including a large population of Mayans, started coming to the U.S. since the 1980s during the Guatemalan Civil War, the decade between 2010 and 2020 was the decade of great exodus to the U.S. And some statistics say that Guatemalan population increased about 60%. So there's this, I'd like to show you these maps, which I find very interesting. So for many years, Guatemalans migrating to the U.S. have typically chosen to live in Florida, California, Texas, and New York, New Jersey, due to their strong economies and large Latin American communities. And these states still concentrate the larger Guatemalan populations compared to other states. However, destinations have diversified, and today there are Guatemalans in each of the 50 states. So the 2010 census recorded a significant number of Guatemalans in more than 500 of the more of 3,000 counties in the U.S. 10 years later, the 2020 census found significant Guatemalan migrant communities in almost 1,000 new counties. So there are more than 1,500 counties in total with Guatemalan population. So we can see in the first map the counties with Guatemalan population in 2020 that didn't register Guatemalans in the 2010 census. And now in the green map, you can see all the counties with Guatemalan population according to the 2020 census. And so why am I giving this context? Because the Guatemalan Maya have settled through transborder communities in search of a life away from violence, insecurity, lack of opportunities, and low wages. And understanding how Maya Guatemalans live in the U.S. is essential because their invisibility in official statistics might lead to neglect on issues that could benefit them, further perpetuating their marginalization in American society. Some scholars consider thousands of Mayan Guatemalans throughout the country are confronted with the pressure to adapt to an environment that is predominantly Latino Hispanic. And it is true, many Guatemalans adopt many elements of Mexican culture, for example. However, Pedro Solares, he's a Guatemalan lawyer that has worked communities to identify spaces where Guatemalan migrants mimic their places of origin. And while mestizo Latino Guatemalans prefer to migrate to large cities to mingle with other Latinos, Guatemalan Mayans prefer to migrate to small cities or rural towns in search of ethnic and linguistic connections. Furthermore, they build a sense of belonging by maintaining their agricultural habits or by seeking to join evangelical churches where pastors are from their town and speak the same language. So, as you can see a picture of me here in the first time I went to Woodburn, and I got very excited because while I was walking there for a few blocks, I felt like I was back home. So while mirror cities are not historically new or limited to Mayan migrants, in recent decades they are changing the face of rural US. So this doesn't mean that there are no Mayans in large cities, but this is the tendency in recent years. So although CLLAS' conceptual contribution is known to scholars of Guatemalan migration, there are still few ethnographic examples published. One example is a very well known is Indian Town in Florida that has been studied since the 90s, I think. But so, like Oregon. So Guatemala has one of the highest rates of rural residents in the Americas, up to 60%. So as a result, many Guatemalan Maya are farmers or day laborers who are used to hard work and rural living. So in the last decade, many Guatemalan Mayas have settled in Oregon towns due to the high supply of agricultural work, the fishing industry, and their proximity to areas where the salal plant, this is a picture of the salal, pine cones and mushrooms are located. Men work in the fields, particularly in the salal, but in the summers where it's no salal season, they work in the berry fields, in construction, landscaping, and the fish companies. And women specifically, they also work in the salal, but mostly picking berries in the fields and cleaning houses and hotels and restaurants. So here are some numbers. We can see that in 2000, there, according to the official statistics, there were about 3,000 Guatemalans living in Oregon, and by 2020, there were more than 14,000. So, and also we can see the map here. It's taken from the previous map I showed you, but this is the bigger. And show the counties where Guatemalans are present today. Also, it's important to know that these numbers have increased because migration patterns have changed in the last decade. So before, mostly men used to migrate temporarily to work. Now women migrate as much as men, establishing families in the U.S. In fact, of the more than 600,000 new Guatemalans who appeared in the 2020 census, for the first time, the majority were women. So, knowing all this, my research aims to identify and analyze subjective, symbolic, social, political, and institutional experiences of how Maya women in Oregon are building their sense of collective identity in Oregon. My approach highlights the elements and practices of their cultural, historical, and territorial past that they decide to preserve and which ones to forget and why. To achieve this, I use as a framework migrant memory. And just to explain a little bit about what migrant memory is, migrant collective memory, although it's folklorized on the surface, mainly constitutes a source of knowledge and political actions and resistance. It highlights the continuous connections and reinterpretations of traditions and historical narratives related to belonging and identity between people in various locations that nurture a collective identity. So, according to the literature, transborder migrants are reshaping notions of territory and politics by developing creative models of governance, education, and economic development, and maintaining their cultures and languages across territories. Maya migrant women are the leading producers of history and identities in their communities, which are being built in a context of complex intersectional relationships challenged by trauma, racism, poverty, gender violence, post-war So during my field work last summer, I gathered data that supports all these conjectures. So during last summer, I collected 20 oral histories of Maya migrant women and men living in Oregon, 14 women and 6 men. They were between 18 and 49 years old. 16 were Mam, 2 Copti and 2 Acateco, all from Huehuetenango, Guatemala. And the interviews took place in Corvallis and Newport. And I did observations in Woodbourne, Cottage Grove, Beaverton, and Hillsborough. My original plan was just to interview women, but when I went to Newport, most men were not working. It's not CLLAS season, and there were no jobs available in the fish companies. So they asked me to interview them. So because they had time and they wanted the gift card. So I was like, sure, why not? And I thought this was interesting. I could compare both insights. I wanted to do interviews in Woodbourne and more places, but I didn't realize that during summer, in that area, most people are working in the fields. So my contacts in Woodbourne told me that they were busy. Even though I contacted like 3 different times, I didn't want to keep pushing, so I relied mostly on my observations and some informal talks I had with some people I know. And also I tried to approach 2 local organizations in the area, but I never heard back. So due to these challenges, me going to these places as an observer was helpful. So let's start with the findings. A little bit about the interviewee's profile. As it says here, los que estamos aquí estamos luchando por un sueño. The ones we are here, we are fighting for a dream. I thought that was a good way of summarizing their profile. And all my interviewees come from a background of extreme poverty. They live in villages and hamlets with scarce services. All said they work in the fields or shepherd with their parents during childhood. Women also mentioned weaving and cooking at home or selling at the markets. Most did not complete elementary school, only 2 people. They were women. 2 women graduated from high school, and one woman told me that she could neither read or write. While in Guatemala, most were monolingual and only began to speak Spanish when they came to the U.S. And almost no one speaks English. The women that were the youngest ones, they did speak a little bit of English. And also all are Christians, which is important. So most of them are evangelical, some are Catholic, and all of them are affiliated with a church. So when I was talking to them, they shared with me a little bit about their trauma experience in Guatemala, and I could identify 4 that one are the consequences from the Civil War. Some interviewees recall their houses being burned by the military, even though they were very young, or they heard stories about the murder of relatives and neighbors, and all of them remember, many of them remember their parents being forced displaced. Like they were, from example, one woman told me that their family was from Los Santos, but they had to move to Salcaja in Quetzaltenango, and then she returned back when she got married in Los Santos. So this we can hear a lot of these stories. Also, gender-based violence. Also, the women talk to me a lot about arranged marriages. Some of I remember one woman specifically who her first child was when she was 16 or 15. They said that 14, 16 years old marriages are very common, and also they highlight financial dependence on fathers or husbands because they didn't work in Guatemala. Also, they mentioned a lot of insecurity and violence. All interviewees mentioned strong presence of gangs in their towns. And one woman specifically requested asylum after having been attacked by a gang, so she narrated and then her husband and children apply for asylum. And finally, which I found very interesting, is also stories of extractivism and territorial disputes. A woman said her mother and siblings were displaced because a mine requested their eviction. Mining is a problem in Huehuetenango. And also another one talked about how the neighbor municipality was reclaiming the land their family was living in. These land disputes are also a consequence, you could say, of the Civil War, or even before that. So this is important to know because when they come here to the US, they have all this baggage, right? So during my field work, I observed different social spaces that are important for the Mayans' communal life. For example, the evangelical churches, the local committees, the Guatemalan stores, I'm going to talk in depth later, parties like marimba dances, local non-profits, and also social media. And here I put the cities or towns where what I have seen, heard that they're, for example, is to go to the evangelical church in Corvallis. I got to know this church very well. The local committees in Woodburn are very strong and they are very, active in their activities. And parties, they mostly happen in Portland. I follow some of these pages in Facebook and they advertise the parties, I don't know, every 2 months or so. And also there are some local nonprofits, particularly in Newport and Woodburn, that work with the Mayan community. And the social media, there are groups that are specifically for the Mayan, and they are connected in between Oakland, California, some in Washington, particularly Forks, Washington, and the Maya here in Oregon. So before talking about the Guatemalan stores and why I'm going to talk about the Guatemalan stores, I would like to talk a little bit about what women told me about their lifestyle or their thoughts. As it says here, one woman said, extraño a mi familia, pero no quiero regresar a Guatemala. Aquí hay lo que no teníamos antes. So she says she misses her family, but she doesn't want to go back because here she has what she didn't have before. And women feel that life here has changed for them more than for men. I don't have time to talk about men here, but maybe we can have another conversation about it. But as I said, women didn't work in Guatemala outside their household, so here they have money to spend in what they want. And also they miss their parents and other relatives, but that doesn't mean that they would like to go back permanently, only to visit. Most of them wanted to go visit. So and they want to stay because they feel like their children have better opportunities in this country. However, they know that buying a house here is difficult. That's one thing that gives them stress, because so they don't rule out the possibility of returning to Guatemala, and they support their husbands to work hard to purchase a house in Guatemala. And most people I interviewed, they already have land and house in Guatemala just in case they have to return, or and also it's a sign of and it represents some kind of pride and status to have a house in Guatemala, even they are not living there. Language is very important, and parents continue to teach their children to speak their language. But interestingly, in interethnic marriages, which there are plenty, women adopt their husband's language, and that is the language spoken at home. So if the wife is Chuj, for example, and the husband is Mam is the language spoken in the household. And at least that's what I found when I was talking with these women. And also, some women said that they stop working when their children are born because they cannot afford a babysitter. So So, but they do it, they're okay with that because they want to spend time with their children. Another important thing to highlight is that all women still wear their traditional clothes, like the picture here, although most don't wear it daily, only for special days or activities, because getting textiles here can be expensive. So, about the cultural practices, everyone told me that they don't want to forget their culture, their towns, as it said here, and no queremos olvidar a nuestro pueblo. And most women I interviewed told me that they teach their daughters to weave. Some said their mothers taught them and that they sewed their weavings while living in Guatemala, but here most continue to weave in their free time and hope to teach their daughters to weave when they are older. But some women stated that they can no longer maintain the weaving tradition because they don't have time, because work is their priority. When they have land, when they have a yard, they grow Mesoamerican seeds and herbs like chiracayote, beans, yerba mora. And those without land purchase them from Guatemalan or Mexican stores or bring them from Guatemala. Thanks to this, they can continue to cook traditional Guatemalan food. However, they recognize that their diet has somehow changed. And finally, women are very active in maintaining the community's social life. For example, they organize get-togethers with family and neighbors, mostly through the church. And one woman said that they were thanking women while taking care of them during pregnancy. They cook, and also, well, even though they're very active socially, they acknowledge that there aren't as many activities as in Guatemala, and living here can feel a little bit isolated. So here in this picture, this is a picture of a woman I interviewed, Avelina. She and her family have been weavers for generations. Her family regularly send her textiles. They weave in Guatemala, and she weaves here too, having a prosperous transborder and multi-generational business, selling textiles to her community members, but also in local fairs and in markets. And currently, she's teaching her children to weave. So I was realizing that for the Mayans in Oregon, commerce is mostly a feminine space. Many women work but dedicate themselves to commerce in their free time. They sell from their homes or open shops. They sell products through social media or travel to other towns to sell products at events like soccer games or after church services. They sell the crops from their backyards and constantly bring products from Guatemala and send boxes to their relatives. And during holidays, they cook and sell traditional Guatemalan food, mostly tamales or products or atolls. Although it might not seem like it, because they are everyday activities, commerce and stores maintain commonality and are spaces of cultural resistance. In my research, I want to explore the role of Guatemalan shops as a space where collective memory is kept, built, and reinvented. During this exploratory research, I only interviewed a woman who owned a public store. You can see her in the picture. And she told me that she used to sell Guatemalan products for many years in her living room before she opened this store about 3 years ago. And she said she opened it because she wanted to take care of her children after school. But she said that having a store is expensive and that the rent is high and that she had to spend their money in repairs. So here, So here there are some pictures of Guatemalan stores I visited. And I went there as a, let's say, participant observant, that means a consumer. And I went to Woodburn, Cottage Grove, Beaverton, and Hillsborough. And of those stores, most of the owners were women. I saw 3 stores owned by men, but women were the ones working at the store. So I would like to learn more about the gender dynamics at the stores, among other things like if they're profitable or not. And so, my conclusions, so maybe they're not conclusions, but this is where I'm standing right now in my research. And so in summary, I want to keep exploring Guatemalan stores as places of memory. And because women rely on Guatemalan stores to purchase Guatemalan products, but it's also a space that provides connection with the homeland. Men and women use communal practices to manage, self-regulate, and defend their culture and territories daily. These constantly updated communal practices use memories from past generations. And women play an essential role by being the front lines of rebellions, rallies, and religious celebrations, maintaining the traditions of living and preparing feasts served at events. In Guatemala indigenous communities, commerce has traditionally been a strategy for economic survival, particularly for women. And according to the Guatemalan Exporters Association, 43% of economically active Guatemalan women are engaged in commerce due to lack of access to other employment opportunities. This allows them to contribute to their family's income and participate in decision-making in their homes and communities. So selling and importing products from Guatemala not only benefits the economy of Mayan women, but also helps maintain their culture and communal practices. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a great presentation. Our final presentation is called Faculty Museum Collaboration Around Undocumented Migration, the Experience of Hostile Terrain 94 at UO. And we have presenters Tobin Hansen, who is an instructor of social science at the University of Oregon's Robert D. Clark Honors College. His research examines human migrations and deportation, state carceral power, and social identities. He is co-editor of Voices of the Border Testimonials of Migration, Deportation, and Asylum in 2021. And we also have Kristen Elizabeth Yaras, who is an associate professor of global studies and women's gender and sexuality studies and department head of WGSS. She also serves on the Dreamers Working Group Steering Committee at the U of O. She's been extremely active this year, and we thank her very much for all that she's been doing on campus in this time. Her research on the topic of transnational migration focuses on engaged activists and accompaniment approaches. Her recent co-edited book, Accompaniment and in Migrant Communities, Engaged Ethnography, was published by the University of Arizona Press in 2024. She's currently working on a book project exploring contested histories of sanctuary and movements for migrant justice and inclusion, which I'm very much looking forward to. Please welcome Tobin and Kristen.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Center for Latino Latin American Studies, ELI, for the space to have the conversation, and of course for the grant money to bring the collaboration of Hostile Terrain 94 to the University of Oregon. So I'm going to contextualize broadly the aims and some of our process, and then turn it over to my collaborator, Professor Yaras, to talk about program evaluation and responses that we've gotten. The Undocumented Migration Project is housed at University of California, Los Angeles, directed by cultural anthropologist Jason De Leon. One of the aims of the Undocumented Migration Project is to bring visibility to experiences of clandestine crossing, particularly in the time since 1994 and the U.S. Border Patrol Strategic Plan of Prevention through Deterrence, which has displaced unauthorized crossers from historical crossing points in border cities through technological infrastructure, physical infrastructure, saturation patrols, out into desolate, very dangerous areas between ports of entry. This has led to suffering, the death of more than 10,000 border crossers or would-be border crossers since 1994 at least, and more than 4,000 in the region that Hostile Terrain 94 highlights. So the project itself is an interactive, participatory, educational, traveling pop-up exhibit. It's been hosted by more than 150 universities and colleges in many countries around the world. In collaborating with, in receiving CLLAS grant money, we were able to then collaborate, Kristen and I, with the Museum of Natural Cultural History to open up space for people to engage Hostel Train 94 right here at the University of Oregon, right here in Eugene and Linn County. So our goals were to bolster migration education as it occurs on the campus, and really at root to humanize, recognize the full personhood of people who are migrating through ports of entry, between ports of entry, as well as the broader structures that are at work, political, economic, legal structures that displace people and create dangerous conditions. And lastly, on campus and outside of this campus, in the broader local community, we sought to strengthen ties and create conversations. There is a QR code up on the screen if you'd like to read more in-depth co-authored piece where we highlight some of the objectives. In addition, you'll see some of our co-authors are named in the piece, Liz White, Lauren Willis, and Craig from the Museum of Natural Cultural History, who were wonderful collaborators, and I want to make sure to name. So we secured funding. We had in the summer of 2024 planning sessions, by late spring of last year, summer of 2024 planning sessions to seek ways to include people in to this project and the co-curricular programming around the project, and to reach out to faculty members around campus who would be able to integrate Hostel Train 94 into their classes. By the end of summer, 1st of fall, we had the kit, the Hostel Train 94 kit sent to us from Los Angeles. That was with the CLLAS grant money that we took possession, and we were doing outreach as well to folks who may be interested, folks that we could identify who may be interested in integrating the project into their class. We also last summer and early fall created a pedagogical tool, a resource guide of text, videos, had exploratory questions for folks to be able to build into their curricula. In the fall, in the winter, then classes began participating, and community members with some additional events began participating in the exhibit itself, in the creation of the exhibit, through the writing of toe tags. And toe tags are symbolic of people who have died attempting to cross in the desert. The students engaged that activity within the context of learning more about clandestine migration. The exhibit was mounted in early spring of 2025, several weeks ago, mounted the exhibit in the museum, and we were able to do some co-curricular programming, have folks in, we had an opening reception, a faculty perspectives panel, and a beautiful talk from Bella Torres from the Undocumented Migration Project herself. So we had some really nice, well-attended events that further engaged campus community and folks beyond the campus. And in terms of reach, just to provide a little bit of idea about volume, there's 22 classes were able to engage over the time that the exhibit was being prepared or was mounted. Almost 1,000 University of Oregon students and many more community members were able to engage in the exhibit, filling out toe tags. We had a collaboration with the Oregon Folklife Network and a wonderful local artist, Kenya Marquez, who made the altar. So there was integration of some local creativity, and they made this particular exhibition of Hostel Train 94 really something that belonged to Oregon, something that belonged to Linn County and to U of O. We had some internship opportunities for undergraduate students who became guides, interpreters, docents at the museum, and helped in that role, as well as folks who mounted the exhibit itself. And Alejandra Pedraza, who I think just had to step out, was our wonderful graduate student worker attached to the project as well, giving support on the project. Thank you. I'll leave it there to my colleague, Kristen. Thank you.
Yeah, so it was wonderful to receive this CLLAS grant as Tobin has described, because the ability to bring the kit here was like the seed. The CLLAS grant truly was a seed that flourished in all these different ways, both on campus and off. I'm feeling a little nostalgic because the exhibit closed last Friday. And we were just talking about students who were acting as guides and interpreters in the site, like this week, like, what am I gonna do now? But it really became a big part of our lives this last year. One of the other things, though, that we wanted to do with the CLLAS grant was kind of evaluate the impact of particularly visitors' experiences to the exhibit itself. And so working with the museum staff and with Alejandra's help, we created a number of tools to kind of assess the impact that people had visiting the space, visiting the exhibit space. Excuse me. So one of those tools was just a series of notebooks, and I wanted to have hard copies here. I have an image on the next slide that were set up in the space on tables and chairs, where we invited people in to share their reflections, just written into the notebooks. And one thing that was really important to us working with the MNCH, the museum staff, over last summer and fall as we were preparing for installation, was allowing for or creating space for the emotional response that this installation, that this exhibit would have. So it's really important to us to kind of, I'm not a museum person at all, but we talked constantly in dialogue with our museum collaborators about like softening the space. So for instance, these notebooks were on a table with chairs. It was a round table. There were like tissue boxes on the table. And every time I took students or community members into the exhibit over the 6 weeks that it was up, I saw people just sitting there, you know, filling out the notebooks or just having that space to sit. Similarly, in front of the altar, there were 2 sofas, kind of angled, so people often would just sit, right? Like, so rather than feeling like you had to move in and out of this space, we just wanted people to be in the space. And that was really important to us. And so part of the evaluation was like allowing people to reflect on what being in the exhibit brought up for them, both emotionally, intellectually, or personally, through these notebooks. And then we also created just a little Qualtrics code, a quick survey where we asked people a series of questions very easily. It was like you could finish this in 2 minutes. How did visiting this exhibit impact your understanding of undocumented migration, etc. And then we also had on the ofrenda, on the altar itself, it's not pictured here, but there was a basket of little cutout flowers, and we invited people on this table in front of the sofas to just write a message to any missing migrant or any loved one in their own family member. And so those little paper flowers got placed on the altar or in the basket in front. So it was kind of an interactive way for people to engage with the space. We haven't used those little flowers yet. We haven't used them or tabulated or collated them, but the museum, what they're doing is archiving the exhibit. All the toe tags have been taken down, and they're archiving it in the museum along with those little flowers. And then we're gonna have a student assistant over the summer help us type up all the comments, so that'll be sort of archived in the museum's memory. So I'm just gonna share a little bit of what people shared in terms of the feedback in these notebooks. Like I mentioned, there was a couple of them placed on the table, and they invited people in to just share their thoughts and feelings. And of course, there was some silliness, you could tell that kiddos had come in and ha ha ha, there was some silliness in the notebooks, but there's also a lot of gravity in the notebooks, and in reading them over the weekend and kind of thinking about what to share with you in terms of quotes, it was hard to select. But as Toda and I were talking about earlier this week, the overarching sentiment was that visiting the museum did 2 things for people. It allowed people to kind of personally connect with either a very personal connection to undocumented migration that might be familiar or personal in their lives, and or connect to something that they feel like is abstract to their lived experience through participating in the museum exhibit. Of course, many visitors to the exhibit also had participated in the toe tags or had done this in a class or something else. But these quotes just share some of that kind of personal connection. Often people would connect to their own family members and or connect to qualities or attributes of the migrants themselves. On the tags were often information about the person's, the location where they were found, their age, their projected age, etc. And people often connected to, especially college student age, visitors to the museum, like that could have been me. They were 20, they were 21, they were my age. And people connected to the borderlands region, like I am from Tucson, or I am from Phoenix, or I have family there. They connected regionally, or they connected through their own family stories of migration, as one of the quotes here indicates. So there were really sort of two overarching themes: making this personal connection to stories of undocumented migration and migrant death, and then secondarily, or also of primary importance, but another second theme was just humanizing the experience of undocumented migration. And we saw that a lot in the notebooks, and I think Tobin and I haven't, the museum exhibit just came down over the weekend, so we haven't had time to talk about like what we're going to do with some of this feedback, other than it will be archived in the museum. So we'd welcome your suggestions for like how to share some of these stories that were shared with us in these notebooks. And then also I just wanted to share a little bit about the feedback that we got from our Qualtrics survey, and shout out Alejandra, who had to leave, who helped us using the CLLAS support. We were able to support Alejandra with a small stipend to help us set up the Qualtrics survey. And that asked people, to what extent did participating in the HD 94 exhibit increase your understanding of the human consequences of migration? And that was a Likert scale response. And so most people said either very much or the next strongest response on that 1 to 5 scale. And we think this is because, just in informal conversations, because of the way that the exhibit humanizes the context of migration. And particularly people responded to the depth and dimensionality of the wall map, because it sort of layers out those geolocated mounted toe tags, and it gives this sense of the kind of scalar impact of migrant death over time in place. And I think that was really profound for people. And also on the toe tags, we don't have it pictured here, were QR codes. And whenever I was there, I saw people doing this and encouraged them to do it. The QR code would take you to video vignettes constructed by the Undocumented Migration Project and their Missing Families Project, which Perla talked about in their talk last week that Tobin mentioned. And they would have interviews with family members, short video vignettes. And so we also saw people like sitting in the sofa and engaging with the broader family stories of migration that the wall-mounted toe tags represented. So then the survey also asked people what particular aspects of visiting the museum increased their understanding. And you can see some of those, the tactile experience of completing toe tags, of holding them, also walking around, reading the names. I don't think Tobin mentioned this, but it was something that I did in my classes when I had the winter classes that I had fill out toe tags. Part of the learning activity you had was a sharing out or reading of the names, which for those of us that know Latin American political history and solidarity history, that has like particular symbolic impact, sort of saying of the names or singing of the names or chanting of the names. And then people really appreciated the ofrenda, as Tobin said, which we should not take credit for the ofrenda at all. That was really, we had this idea of wanting something interactive. My idea was like an árbol de la vida or something where people could like put those kind of flowers up on the wall. But it was the museum staff that connected through the Oregon Folklife Network to Kenya, the artist, and that was her vision. But that was really important. I think the ofrenda really like gave our Hostile Terrain 94 exhibit its own Oregon life, as Tobin mentioned. And then finally, we asked people for just additional reflections on what emotions in particular or thoughts did the exhibit bring up, and there was a range of them. I've only named some of them here. The obvious ones probably sadness, anger, grief, but also outrage, and a lot of people talked about wanting to do something. We don't have it pictured here, but as people left the museum, we had a QR code and a little brochure for like organizations, ways to get involved, and we linked there the Undocumented Migration Project, their kind of sister organization, the Colibri Center for Human Rights, other missing migrant family projects, the family network of Perlatores, that Perla coordinates, and then we also had local Oregon and local organizations working with immigrant communities in Oregon in that little brochure. We wanted to share that with people as they left the exhibit space. And then people talked about just feeling like it was important to have this exhibit at University of Oregon in this political moment. And I guess I would just say this as something that maybe we will have some time to talk about, although time is running out. We wanted to bring this exhibit here for years. I've been in touch with Jason De Leon for years wanting to bring this, and it just so happened that we got the CLLAS grant, and last summer the museum stepped up as our hosting partner, and it was the summer of 2024, and then it was the fall of 2024, and then the museum never wavered in their commitment to mounting this exhibit, even in this particular political context of the necropolitics of terror against migrant communities that we're all experiencing. The museum never wavered, and I was really, really grateful for that partnership. We did get some feedback on campus about because we invited classes, and I think Tobin mentioned this, dozens of classes in the spring term visited the installed exhibit through class projects, but some people, instructors, faculty members said, I don't feel comfortable bringing my class to this topic in this time. Which was interesting, and I'd be happy, I think, to have a broader conversation about that. Tobin and I both teach anthropologies of migration. I teach a transnational migration class, every single year at the U of O, and always, address issues of policy-related structural forms of violence that produce migrant death. This is something that we teach, and we try to humanize this in our teaching as anthropologists of migration. But I respect that some people have different approaches to this material. I did feel really impassioned and connected to Perla Torres, our visitor, last Thursday night at the closing talk, because she was really bold and sort of calling us to not turn away from migrant death, particularly in this particular moment. So just happy to talk about some more about how we approach these kinds of topics, how we continue to teach them, how we continue to humanize undocumented migration and those whose lives are lost due to political violence. So yeah, I think I'll skip over this really quickly, but the one thing that I want to say is, again, deep agradecimiento to CLLAS for seeding this project. Both Tobin and I feel like really inspired by our collaboration with the museum, and we want to do more public-facing, collaborative, crowdsourced, public-facing education. We don't have a Center for Migration Studies here, obviously, but another thing that this project did, with Tobin's help, reaching out to so many faculty members who teach migration-related topics, there's now these conversations about we need a Center for Migration Studies here, which is a conversation many of us have long had, but maybe with some of these new faculty member, new assistant professors who teach these topics, we can bring that to fruition. So TBD on that, ... So just millones de gracias, particularly museum staff who Tobin already named, Alejandra Pedraza, a PhD student in sociology who helped us with the Qualtrics survey, all the faculty and students who participated, and to CLLAS as well.
Okay, so we have just a very short amount of time.